I was coming back from a work trip that honestly had already drained me. You know those trips you just want to end? That was this one. I had been driving for hours trying to keep my eyes open and counting the minutes until I could get home, lie in my bed, and forget the day even happened. The road was deserted. I hardly saw another car passing by, and the rain was relentless. It was like one of those horror movie storms where you can only see a foot in front of the car, and the darkness feels like it's swallowing you whole. I thought to myself that the only thing missing was a crazy person appearing in the middle of the road to complete the scene. Well, I should have kept my mouth shut. It was on one of those curves that I saw it. At first, I thought I was imagining things, maybe exhaustion, but no. There was a woman on the shoulder, completely soaked. She looked desperate. No coat, nothing, just a thin outfit that was already clinging to her body from being so wet. I slowed down, wondering if I should stop or not. You know that feeling that something's wrong, but at the same time you think, I can't just leave this person here, especially in this rain? Yeah, that's exactly what went through my mind. So I stopped. I rolled down the window and asked if she needed help. She looked at me with eyes I'll never forget. They were sad eyes, like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, but at the same time, there was an air of, I don't know, something strange, like she wasn't really there. Anyway, I asked if she wanted a ride, and she just nodded without saying a word. She opened the door and got in, not even caring that the seat was already getting soaked. I tried to make conversation because, it seemed like the right thing to do. I asked her name, what she was doing there alone in the middle of the road. She only gave basic answers, said her name was Emma, and that she needed to go home. When I asked where that was, she just pointed ahead and said to keep going. I thought it was weird, but who was I to question? So we continued down the road. The silence in the car was suffocating. I put on some low music to try and lighten the mood, but it seemed like nothing worked. Every time I tried to say something, she'd respond with those short answers, Like she didn't really want to talk. And I started wondering what the hell I was doing, giving a ride to a stranger who looked like she'd walked straight out of a horror movie to someplace I didn't even know. After a few miles, she finally asked me to stop. And that's when things started to get really weird. The road where she asked to get out had nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean absolutely nothing. Just trees, a dirt path that seemed to lead nowhere. I looked at her, expecting her to explain where she wanted to go, but she just looked straight ahead, like she already knew exactly what she was doing. I asked again, "Are you sure? There's nothing here." And she, calm as if it was the most normal thing in the world, replied, "I live here. I've been living in this place for 10 years. That's when I froze. How could she live there? There wasn't even a house in sight, nothing that indicated any kind of life. But she was so certain of what she was saying that I just let her go. I watched her get out of the car, walking in the rain like she was heading to a familiar place. The whole thing left me so unsettled that I couldn't even drive right after. I stayed there for a few minutes, trying to make sense of what had just happened. When I finally decided to keep going, my mind was racing. Nothing that happened made sense. As I drove, I started thinking about all the things that could have gone wrong. What if this woman was lost? What if she really needed help? I felt like an idiot for leaving her there, but at the same time, something told me it wasn't my concern. It felt like she, wasn't real, like something had happened that I couldn't explain. I kept driving, but I couldn't get her image out of my head. That empty look, the way she just disappeared into the darkness. I needed some time to process it all. That's when I decided to stop at a gas station, grab a coffee, and try to clear my head. The station was one of those rundown roadside places, with an attendant who looked like he'd seen it all. I parked, went inside, and headed straight for the coffee. While I was drinking it, a trucker walked into the station. He looked exhausted but friendly, the type that enjoys a good conversation. I'm not usually one to talk to strangers, but that day I needed to get off my chest what was bothering me. So, out of nowhere, I started telling him about the woman I found on the road. I told him everything, from the moment I stopped the car to the place where she got out. When I mentioned where she asked to get out, the trucker stopped, as if I had said something wrong. He looked at me with an expression that mixed surprise and concern. "Where did you say you dropped her off?" he asked, almost not believing it. I repeated the location and he slowly shook his head like he was trying to process the information. And that's when he said something I wasn't prepared to hear. He said, "Buddy, there's no way someone lives there. That area is an old cemetery, abandoned decades ago. I've been driving these roads for years and I guarantee you there's never been a house, a village, nothing. It's just woods and memories of those who are gone." At that moment, I didn't know what to think. It was like the ground had disappeared from under my feet. What had I just seen? Who was that woman? And why did she say she lived there if there was nothing? I left the station feeling a weight in my chest, a confusion I couldn't shake. And to this day, when I think back to that night, I wonder what really happened. Because honestly, I don't know what to believe anymore. After leaving the station, I could barely think straight. Everything the trucker had said kept spinning in my head, like I was stuck in a cycle of thoughts that led nowhere. But what bothered me the most was that everything made sense, even though I didn't want to admit it. You know when you try to convince yourself that something strange is just in your head? That's what I did as I drove back home. I turned on the radio, tried to focus on the road, but nothing shook that feeling of unease. When I finally got home, I felt a little better. My apartment was my refuge, my safe place. I just wanted to forget that night, take a hot shower and try to sleep. But of course, nothing is that simple after you've had an experience like that. As soon as I walked in, my phone started ringing. It was my girlfriend, Rachel. She knew I was coming back from a trip and was probably worried because it had taken me so long. I answered, trying to sound normal, but she immediately sensed something was wrong. I couldn't hide it. She has this way of reading me like an open book. She asked what had happened and I, not really knowing where to start, ended up telling the whole story. From the woman on the road to what the trucker said at the station. Rachel was silent for a while, and I knew she was trying to process what I had told her. She's not the type to believe in ghost stories or anything like that, but she's also not as skeptical as I used to be. She has an open mind, but at the same time, she's very logical. So when she finally spoke, what she said caught me off guard. "Do you think it could have been a lost soul? Like someone who's still stuck between this world and the next?" I laughed a little awkwardly, not because I thought the idea was ridiculous, but because in some way it made sense. And that scared me more than anything else. I replied that I didn't know, that it could be anything. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But the truth is, deep down, I knew there was something more there. Something I didn't want to admit. Rachel tried to calm me down, saying it was probably just a misunderstanding, that I was probably too tired and exaggerating things. But I could hear in her voice that she wasn't entirely convinced either. We said our goodbyes, and I finally went to take my shower, trying to wash away the weight of it all. But the night, as you can imagine, wasn't easy. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the face of that woman, soaked by the rain, with that empty and deep look. It felt like she was there at my bedroom door watching me, waiting for me to do something. I got up several times to check the doors, the windows, just to make sure everything was locked. By morning, I was already exhausted. I had only slept for a few hours, and even then it was that light sleep, full of confusing nightmares that didn't make sense. Since that incident, I avoid being out during the dead hours. I admit I don't want to experience anything like that again. Liam and I have been friends since high school, the inseparable kind. And as everyone knows, we never turned down a good party. So when Eric, a longtime friend of ours, invited us to celebrate his birthday at a club in the neighboring state, we agreed immediately. I've always enjoyed hitting the road, and Liam, who was obsessed with his sports bike, couldn't wait to speed down those highways. We left home around 5 p.m. thinking it would be just another fun night out with friends. Little did we know what was coming. When we arrived at the club, the place was already packed. It was one of those noisy nightclubs with flashing lights and loud music, you know? It didn't take long for us to mingle with the crowd, have a few beers, and start enjoying the night. The party was lively, everyone dancing and having a good time, but right from the start I felt something off. I noticed there were two guys who always seemed to be around us. At first I thought it was just my imagination. After all, the club was crowded, so it was normal to run into the same people several times. But as the night went on, I started to notice that no matter where we went inside the club, those two guys were always nearby. When we went to the bar, there they were, leaning against the counter. When we went to the dance floor, they would appear out of nowhere and linger around as if they were watching us. Initially, I tried to ignore it and focus on the party, but that weird feeling wouldn't leave me. I ended up mentioning it to Liam. He laughed, saying I was probably tripping because of the beers, but after paying closer attention, he started noticing them too. Liam isn't the type to get easily intimidated, but you could tell he was starting to get suspicious as well. We decided to ask Eric if he knew the guys, if they were part of his group or something. When we found Eric, he was talking to some other people, so we waited a bit to not interrupt. As soon as he was free, I explained the situation and described the guys. Eric seemed surprised and said he had no idea who they were. Then he laughed and said they were probably just other clubgoers enjoying the night, and that we were probably exaggerating. We tried to accept his explanation and got back to the party, but Liam and I remained on alert. The party kept going and we tried to enjoy it as much as we could, but those two guys were always around, like shadows. The feeling that something wasn't right kept growing. The strangest thing was that they never tried to approach us or talk to us. They just stayed at a distance observing. It was hard to figure out what their deal was, and that only made everything more disturbing. It was almost 2 a.m. when the party started winding down. People were saying their goodbyes and leaving, and the club was much emptier. Liam and I decided it was time to head home. Despite the unease, we didn't want to sleep there and preferred to hit the road back. We got on Liam's bike, ready to face the deserted highway. As we got on the highway, I instinctively looked back, and that's when I saw something that made my stomach churn. A motorcycle was following us, and I was sure it was those two guys. I mentioned it to Liam, who checked the rearview mirror and saw the same thing. He told me it could be just a coincidence, but we sped up a bit just in case. But the other bike kept pace, no matter how fast we went. Liam tried to lose them by changing lanes and speeding up even more, but the guys were always right behind us, glued to our tail. When we passed through a more isolated stretch of the road, where there was almost no lighting, I saw in the mirror's reflection that one of the guys pulled out a gun. I couldn't believe what I was seeing and yelled at Liam to go as fast as he could. I had never been so scared in my life. Liam's bike was fast, but theirs wasn't far behind. They were determined to catch us. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think straight. Every time I looked back, the guys seemed to be getting closer. As we tried to evade them, I grabbed my phone and with trembling hands called the police. I explained the situation as quickly as I could, trying to keep my voice steady, but the desperation was evident in my words. I managed to give our location, and the operator promised to send a patrol car to intercept us. It was the only thing that gave me a bit of hope at that moment. Luckily, there was a patrol in that area. The police managed to reach us in time, and the guys on the other bike realized they were cornered. As soon as they saw the patrol lights, they turned around and disappeared, as if they had never been there. To this day, we don't know who those guys were. We don't know if they wanted the bike or not. We'll never find out, but one thing is for sure. From now on, we'll avoid going out late at night.